I'm going to go ahead and get started with the slides, because as I said, we've got a lot of ground to cover in a very interesting and relatively unfamiliar corner of Europe. And for a lot of people, when you think of Eastern Europe, this is what you think of. These cold, stern images of the former Soviet empire, the former evil empire. And honestly, I think some people are kind of intimidated to go there. They think, well, this was our enemy, our mortal enemy for 40, 50 years. And I'm sure that things are still pretty backwards there from that time. But I'm here to tell you, the first thing that you need to think about if you're thinking about going to Eastern Europe, realize that you need to remove your Cold War blinders. The Cold War communist stuff is old news. And statues like this of Lenin, they're not something to be intimidated by anymore. They're something to kind of have fun with. These statues are now populating parks where tourists love to go and kind of relive the red old days. A lot of people have a mistaken impression that Eastern Europe is a really gloomy, drab place, rusting factories, decrepit infrastructure, gloomy buildings. In most of Eastern Europe, though, the reality is something closer to this. Beautiful pastoral countryside, adorable villages, and really wonderful people. I'm going to talk about two different itineraries covering what we consider to be the absolute best destinations in Eastern Europe. You've got the spectacular cities of Prague in the Czech Republic, Krakow in Poland, Budapest in Hungary. And then, of course, for the Adriatic tour, you've got a little taste of the seaside, this beautiful Adriatic Sea that separates Italy and Croatia, with these shimmering seaside villages, spectacular medieval towns. This is the great wall town of Dubrovnik in Croatia. And we've also tried to splice in, as of course that's part of the Rick Steves mission, splice in a little bit broader experience. It's not just the predictable biggies, but we take a little detour into Bosnia on our Adriatic tour to give you a sense of this fascinating country where East meets West. One thing that really strikes me about this part of Europe is the amazing natural beauty. You've got these beautiful hill towns of Croatia. One of the most spectacular natural sites, I think, anywhere in Europe are the Plitvice Lakes National Park. This is a gorgeous playland of 16 terrace lakes connected by gorgeous waterfalls in the middle of nowhere in Croatia, but it's so great we go out of our way on both of these tours to make sure you get a chance to hike these trails. Just really a breathtaking experience. Also on both tours is Lake Bled in the beautiful Slovenian Alps. Tranquil alpine lakes, cut glass peaks, absolutely stunning. Not maybe what you think of when you think of Eastern Europe, but this is what you'll see on these tours. And of course we stay in beautiful towns where it's just a delight to come home to a place like the main street here in Dubrovnik. For me though, besides all of the wonderful sights and the fascinating history and the beauty and the natural wonders, what really sets Eastern Europe apart are the wonderful people that you'll meet when you travel there. I've traveled a lot in Eastern and Western Europe. I love all parts of Europe, but I sense in a lot of parts of Western Europe, especially heavily touristed towns, you might not always get the warmest welcome. People are maybe a little bit more jaded, they're a little more guarded, they're kind of tired of all the tourists coming through Salzburg or Venice or wherever it is. And the thing about Eastern Europe is, in most of Eastern Europe, although they're certainly well past communism, tourism and people taking an interest in their country is still relatively new. This is a somewhat undiscovered corner of Europe, so people are really warm and open and appreciative that you're coming to learn about them and their culture and their country. So whether you're dancing the traditional Hungarian csardas dance with a vintner's wife here in Hungary, maybe going for a raft trip on a river that separates Slovakia and Poland with a young man very proud of his national costume, or in whatever way you end up connecting with local people, this is really an exceptional experience. Speaking of connecting with local people, I wanted to introduce a couple of guides I have with us here today. Barbara, who's on the end there, she'll talk a little bit later about Slovenia, her home country. But first I'd like to hear a little bit from Barbara Jakopic, not from Barbara Jakopic, from Esther Boros. She's from Hungary, and she's going to tell us a little bit about one of her favorite experiences on our tours through Eastern Europe. So go ahead, and Esther, let us know what you think.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and a very welcome in Edmonds. Concerning the Eastern European tour, I think it would be a really great experience for all of you to meet local school children in a small town of Eger in North Hungary. And actually that's the place where I come from. I was born about 40 minutes from that town. So this is really my home base, if I can call it like that. And I think this is very unique that you will be able to sit down with those school children, chat with them. They can test their English with you, and they would definitely ask plenty of questions because they are curious from the places where you come from. So I think that's something special. In that area, you will also have the experience to learn how to cook the Hungarian gulyás soup. I'm telling you, it's a soup, it's not a ragu. If it's sold a ragu anywhere else, it's wrong. It has to be a soup. You will have a cooking class on that tour. How is that? Isn't it something unique? You will have lots of wine tasting during that tour because these areas are famous for wine. If you thought that only France have good wines in Europe, you're very wrong. You will find out that in Central Europe you can taste excellent, high-quality wines. And the area of Eger is famous for that as well. So I would definitely recommend to come on Eastern Europe and experience an undiscovered corner of Europe. And you should not be afraid of any negative experience. You will be absolutely positively surprised. And of course, I need to talk about my hometown now, Budapest, which is a fantastic, one of the most beautiful capitals in Europe, divided by the Danube, and you will have a fantastic evening cruise. I tell you, Budapest is the second most illuminated city after Paris, and it's beautiful to see it from the river. And especially today, it would be really nice to dip into a warm spa. You can dip into the best spas in Europe in Budapest. How is that? So I hope you're getting thrilled, and you will learn a lot more from Cameron. He will show you beautiful slides, and of course you will learn a lot more from my lovely colleague Barbara about her home country. You're more than welcome to come over to the center, to the cantina for more questions. I will have to run because I have a very tight schedule today, but I would be delighted to see any of you on the Eastern European tour. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Esther. Köszönöm szépen, as they say in Hungary. Köszönöm szépen. She just yelled, "You're welcome" in Hungarian. And I think Esther gave you a wonderful sense of some of the great things that you get to do on these Eastern Europe tours. Cooking classes, you get to sit down in a classroom full of Hungarian school kids and ask them questions. They'll learn from us and we'll learn from them. And so forth. Just really, that's a great day on the tour. I know as a tour guide, we always look forward to that day because it's, sure, we love the big sites, but it's fun having these days where you get to make those one-on-one connections. Let's tell you a little bit more about these tours that we're talking about. Of course, Eastern Europe, by the way, that's kind of a funny, loaded expression. Different people mean different things by Eastern Europe. If you asked Esther and Barbara, they would say, we're not from Eastern Europe, we're from Central Europe. The people who live here are convinced this is Central Europe, which really makes sense if you think this is also Europe. But for Rick Steves and for most Americans' sense of things, Eastern Europe is sort of this central swath cutting through the middle of Europe. And it's basically 7 countries that we're talking about today. We have 3 different itineraries that go through these countries. They're sort of the Grand Survey, Grand Tour course, the best of Eastern Europe in 16 days, which laces together the top sites in 6 countries. If you're interested in just the 2 big capitals, there is a tour that is 1 week divided between Prague and Budapest. That's a really fantastic itinerary if you're really just interested in the cities and really getting to know 2 of the greatest cities of Eastern Europe. And then down south, we have a 14-day tour through the Adriatic that laces together the top sites in Slovenia, Croatia, and a little bit in Bosnia as well. I'll talk more about each of these, of course, as we go along. And now I know all of you, most of you are Rick Steves tour alums. A lot of you have been on our tours, and you're going to be getting sales pitches all day, so I don't have to tell you all the wonderful things about Rick Steves tours, but I can tell you the things that I love about this tour, and something that I think makes Eastern Europe and Adriatic tours really exceptional. Like all Rick Steves tours, we have small groups, and I really love our no grumps policy. We just get the most wonderful people going on our tours with us. And something I find for the Eastern Europe tours, we tend to get people who have traveled a lot on their own or on other tours. We are certainly welcoming to first-timers, but a lot of the folks on this tour are really very seasoned travelers. They've kind of been there, done that. They've seen a lot of the great sights of Western Europe. But they're curious about this whole new world east of the former Iron Curtain. They'd like to know a little bit more. They'd like to get a little bit better a sense of things, but they're a little intimidated to try it on their own. They know that there's different languages in each country, different currencies in most of these countries, and so forth, and they just want a little bit of extra help. So as a tour guide, I find that we get really, really smart, well-traveled, inquisitive people on this tour, which I really appreciate. Of course, like all Rick Steves tour, we're there to help you see the big sites, but we're also there to stick you right down in the middle of some wonderful experiences, not just, for example, exploring an old Roman amphitheater, but as Esther talked about earlier, getting to know some Hungarian school children in a little no-name village that no one's ever heard of in the middle of nowhere in Hungary. It's just a really wonderful part of the tour experience. Great guides, of course, are a hallmark of Rick Steves' tours, and I'm partial, of course, but I particularly enjoy the guides that we work with on this tour. We've got a wonderful cast of guides. Here's just a few of them. This is from the whole of Eastern Europe. Peter Pultzmann, who's a Hungarian, he's from Budapest, and does just a marvelous job of introducing not only his home country, but all of Eastern Europe to our tour members. Marian Krišković, he'll lead you up this ladder and this rickety old former castle tower in the old town of Korčula, this island in Croatia. He'll lead you up the ladder through this little porthole and you'll pop out on this beautiful cocktail bar that's sitting on top of this old cocktail tower. You can watch the sun set over the rooftops of Korčula. The kind of thing that it's really hard to find on your own, and we have tour guides who will kind of help you seek out the things you're interested in. Etelka is from the same area that Esther is from, right near this town of Eger in kind of rural Hungary. She'll introduce you to some Hungarian wines and tell you a little bit more about not only Hungary, but again, all of these countries in Eastern Europe. Tina Hiti is based in Lake Bled, Slovenia, and has a lot of passion not only for Croatia, Slovenia, and Bosnia, but again, for all of Eastern Europe. And then, of course, there's a few of us Americans doing this tour as well. Ben Curtis is a history professor at Seattle University, very well educated. He's written books on Croatian history. He's writing a book on the Habsburgs, and he loves making that bus his rolling classroom. And he also knows how to have a good time. He's a fun guy to hang out with. So this is just a few of the guides that you might end up with on Eastern Europe or Adriatic tours. Barbara Jakopic here. We'll hear from her a little bit later. I want her to talk about Slovenia when we get to her country, but she's another one of our great guides on these tours. Again, pick up our tour brochure for more information on any of these. All the information is also on our website, ricksteves.com. And of course, we have a whole array of guidebooks. Of course, if you go on one of our Eastern Europe tours, you'll get, as a part of the tour package, the guidebook that applies to that tour. You probably have heard about this today, but if you haven't, it's printed on the bottom of your yellow sheet there. We have a very special promotion right now. If you book a tour seat today, you get $100 off any tour for 2013. So if you're thinking about booking, there's a great sale, $100 per seat, but you really have to act quickly. Today is the main day for that. Let's go through these two itineraries, Eastern Europe and Adriatic. Starting with Eastern Europe, this is the Grand Tour. This is one of the things I love about this tour as a tour guide is there's so much variety. Every 2 or 3 days you cross the border into a new country. Each of these countries is very different. It's really a wonderful, wonderful way to see this part of Europe. We start off in Prague, the capital of the Czech Republic, spend a night in the rural eastern part of the Czech Republic in a town called Pustevny. We visit the Sobran concentration camp memorial at Auschwitz once we cross into Poland. Have 3 wonderful nights in Krakow, the glorious medieval capital of Poland. Head down through the mountainous part of Slovakia to the small town of Eger that we've already heard about, where Esther is from. 3 nights in Budapest. First 2 weeks, lots of cities, a couple of small towns, but it's a pretty intensive urban-focused tour. So for the end, as tour guides, we think of this as dessert. We get to head to the natural wonders of Croatia and Slovenia. Things kind of go downshift a little bit, go into low gear, and we can really relax the last few days. Plitvice Lakes National Park, those waterfalls I showed you already. Our very own Adriatic island of Rob for a vacation from our vacation. And Lake Bled up in the Slovenian Alps. This is just a fantastic itinerary. We've been doing this one for about 12 years. Very little has changed on it because we love it so much. And it's a great first look at this region. I'm going to do a quick kind of run through what you'll see on this tour, starting in the Czech Republic, capital city of Prague. The first place that many people go in Eastern Europe, whether they're on one of our tours or on their own, and for good reason. It's the perfect springboard for a trip to Eastern Europe. It's just got this sort of over-the-top romanticism, a gorgeous setting, beautiful buildings, vibrant culture. Prague is just a wonderful city, kind of the cultural capital, you could say, of all of Eastern Europe. There's different parts to Prague, and with our tour, you'll see all of them. Wenceslas Square, which is the main drag of the new town, named for the good king Wenceslas of Christmas Carol fame, who was actually a 10th century Czech duke, who was a very important figure for uniting the Czech people under one strong leader. I want to talk a little bit about the importance of not just the guides on our tours, but the local guides on our tours. And this is something we really emphasize on Rick Steves tours. We try to find the best possible local guides when you get to a certain town to let you know about that particular town. One of our favorite local guides, who also happens to lead the whole tour, you might have him only in Prague, or you might have him for the whole shebang. This is Hans Vihan. He's the co-author of our Prague guidebook. Wonderful guy. And you're walking through the new town of Prague, let's say, and you walk past this low-profile plaque. You might just walk by it and not even notice it. It's just buried, hidden, away from everything in this arcade. It has all of these open hands, showing open hand, peace sign, and the cryptic date, November 17th, 1989. Well, you could just walk right by that and not know what it is, but if you're walking through there with Hansa, he'll stop and say, now look at this plaque. This was the day that all of the students of the Czech Republic came out to celebrate the most important Czech poet. This is an annual celebration where they all kind of come together and celebrate Czech culture and Czech literature. Notice that date is just a few weeks after the Berlin Wall fell. There's a lot of change in the air. And after this official celebration of this poet, these Czech students said, you know what, we're tired of communism, we're tired of this regime, we want some change in this country. They started marching through the city of Prague, gradually an impromptu demonstration towards Wenceslas Square, that grand square I just showed you. They entered an arcade about 2 blocks from the bottom of Wenceslas Square, and all of a sudden they realized they were being surrounded by communist riot police with their batons and their riot gear and their helmets. They were trapped, and the only way that they could show they were peaceful was to hold their hands open like this. The only way they could get out of this crowd of riot police was to go running down this basically tunnel where there were 2 sets of riot police on each side hitting them with their batons. Now, that night, the kids' parents and neighbors and friends found out what happened. They were upset about it. So the next day, there was a bigger demonstration. And the day after that, an even bigger demonstration. And the day after that, more and more people started to come out. And within about 10 days, the communist government of Czechoslovakia peacefully excused itself from existence. Wow. They call it the Velvet Revolution because no shots were fired, no blood was spilled unless you count the injuries sustained by these brave students on the first night. This is the kind of stirring recent history that you're treated to taking the Eastern Europe tour. As amazing as this story is, imagine how amazing it is to hear it from one of those students, 12 years old, out at this protest with his sister, fleeing from riot police. You're actually hearing the stories of Eastern Europe from the people who live that history. Really, something you don't get, I don't think, on just about any other tour. Wow. In addition to all this fantastic recent history, Prague is justifiably famous for its gorgeous architecture, its jewel box of an old town, its breathtaking Old Town Square, one of the finest public spaces, I think, anywhere in Europe. Lots of famous landmarks, and we'll make sure to show you those too. This is the famous astronomical clock on Prague's Old Town Square. And at the top of every hour, this clock has little windows that open, and statues of the 12 apostles shuffle past, and the little skeleton tips his hourglass. And it's really fun to watch the show. I prefer to turn around and watch the hordes of onlookers who've turned out to watch the little show. Prague is crowded. Now, I said earlier, most of Eastern Europe is undiscovered. Prague is the exception. Prague is certainly discovered. It's jammed with people. An advantage of taking a tour, we know where the crowds are and when they're going to be there, and we can make sure that you're not going to get stuck in those crowds. We plan our sightseeing as much as possible to avoid the crowds. Right there in the Old Town Square, there's a statue of Jan Hus. This was this great medieval Czech reformer. He spoke out against church corruption. He was a priest and a university professor. Spoke out about things like indulgences. He tried to get the worshipers more directly in line with the Word of God. He did a lot of the same things that Martin Luther did, except he did them 100 years before Martin Luther, and because of the political climate at the time, he was burned at the stake because of it. So he's a very important figure, understandably, for the Czech people. And I love, as a tour guide, taking people to Prague or anywhere and introducing them to these important historical figures that they might not otherwise know anything about. It's really a fun part of unveiling this history that a lot of us have never heard before, coming from a very different part of the world. By the way, that church that's right behind Jan Hus is one of the great venues, it's St. Nicholas Church, one of the great venues in Prague for concerts. And Prague is one of the best cities in this part of Europe for after-hours classical music, mostly concerts. You can get a wide variety of composers from Czech composers like Dvořák and Bedřich Smetana, to the best of Vivaldi, to Mozart, in really gorgeous surroundings. This is the Estates Theater. This is where Don Giovanni, Mozart's Don Giovanni, originally premiered, and you can go and see a performance of Don Giovanni in this theater a couple times a month. Great city for classical music. You might be approached on the street by one of these guys trying to sell you a tour. But again, if you're on a tour, your tour guide will say, don't bother buying a ticket from this guy. There's a wonderful ticket office, a box office, that's just 2 blocks off the main square. You can go in there and see what all your options are, what's available. You can see photographs of the different beautiful venues and make an informed choice. So there again, having a great tour guide explain all of the ins and outs can help you have a better experience. Of course, there's great street music too, just wonderful performers right out on the street. Prague is a very cultured city, and it's a beautiful city to spend after hours. Throughout Eastern Europe, Jewish heritage, Jewish history is a very important topic. Prague has what's called it's the Jewish Quarter, and they have a series of 6 different synagogues as well as a cemetery that are linked together as one Jewish museum. And that's something that we'll do a course together as a group, so you can learn a little bit about this very important chapter of Czech and Eastern European history. We'll go into some of these synagogues where you find really interesting and really thought-provoking exhibits about the Jewish faith. You can see, for example, the medieval era Jewish graveyard right here in the very city center of Czech Republic of Prague. Prague is also known as the Golden City of 100 Spires for its wonderfully preserved architecture. Prague is one of the only big Eastern European cities that was never destroyed by World War II bombs, so it's remarkably intact and remarkably good condition. And one thing I love to do, if my tour members say, I've got an hour to spare, what should I do? I say, well, just go wandering through the streets of Prague, because they've done a beautiful job recently of restoring these. And even if you're not an architecture fan or don't think you're an architecture fan, strolling through the streets of Prague is a really wonderful experience. It's like flipping the pages of an architecture textbook. You'll see samples of every possible era. For example, this is the Obecní dom, which is the municipal house. Gorgeous Art Nouveau concert hall. Czech Republic has some of the best Art Nouveau anywhere in Europe. We're going to cross the river now over to the castle, and we're going to use Charles Bridge, this famous landmark of Prague. Medieval stone bridge lined by sculptures of saints and jammed all hours of the day and night with buskers, street performers, salesmen, tourists, and occasionally a few Czechs as well. One of the most enjoyable and entertaining 500-yard strolls, I'd say, anywhere in Europe. Across the bridge, you climb up to the beautiful Prague Castle, looking down over the lower town of Prague. On the way over there, though, however, you'll walk across the bridge and notice here's this little island called Kampa Island. If you have a good tour guide, like Katka, she'll lead you down onto Kampa Island and help you find this little back alley that you otherwise would never notice, with a wall covered with graffiti. How terrible, all this graffiti on this wall. But then Katka, who's both a local guide in Prague and leads our entire tours, then she'll tell you the story that this is called the John Lennon Wall, because during the period of communism, the Beatles, or really Western music, Western rock and roll in general, was a symbol of dissent against the communist regime. So young people, in order to show their dissent against the communists, would listen to Beatles music and celebrate the Beatles. And they decided every night, the teenagers would come out and paint murals of John Lennon on this wall. The next morning, the communist police would wake up and whitewash over those murals. The next night, the kids would come back and paint John Lennon murals all over again. And even though communism is long gone, the tradition still continues. You can still walk along this wall and see these murals to John Lennon. Again, this recent history that's so easy to overlook unless you have a good guide to show you and explain it to you. All right, we've reached the top of the castle, looking over this beautiful city of Prague. The Prague Castle is a huge complex, by some measures the biggest castle on earth, and it is crowded. Again, if you go with us, the morning that you go to Prague Castle, we're going to say, all right, folks, you need to be up and in the lobby at 8:15. And you're going to say, 8:15? You're going to say, I wanted to sleep until 8:30 or 9 o'clock. Most days you will get to sleep until 8:30 or 9 o'clock. This day, though, the reason we're getting you up early is we've learned from experience you have to be there on the day that it opens. At the moment that the church opens, because otherwise you're going to get stuck in a crowd like this. So we get you up early so that we're standing at the door of St. Vitus Cathedral at the stroke of 9. We're the first people through the door. We have the place to ourselves for 15 minutes, so you can see all these great sights of Czech history. And then usually by the time we're leaving the church, people can see that flooding through the doors at 9:30 are all of these multinational tour groups, hundreds and hundreds of people, and you can barely walk around in there now. And then people think, it's probably good I didn't sleep in today. So this is an advantage of, again, a tour and a tour guide who really knows how to avoid the crowds. Again, beautiful sights here at Prague Castle, but we'll try to give you a nice, concise look at them. We're not going to tell you every little detail, just the highlights. This is that St. Vitus Cathedral that I just mentioned, sort of the main church of the Czech Republic. Beautiful Gothic interior, beautiful stained glass window by Alphonse Mucha. Again, I love introducing Americans to these people from these mysterious countries in Eastern Europe that they've never heard of before. Even if you're an art lover, you might not know the works of Alphonse Mucha, but he's an immensely talented Art Nouveau artist who worked in the early 20th century. Very proud of his Czech heritage, often overlooked by the Western art institutions because he's from the former evil empire. He's from this obscure little country. But it's so satisfying for people to go and tour Alphonse Mucha's museum, which is across the river in the new town, and learn more about him. By the way, something really exciting going on this year in Prague. They've just recently received the Slav epic. This was Alphonse Mucha's masterwork, 20 gigantic canvases colorfully telling the whole history of the Czech people and basically the whole history of Slavic Christianity. For years, for decades, it's been burrowed away in this tiny little castle in the middle of nowhere. And just this year, they moved it into this spectacular new castle right there in the city of Prague. And your tour guide will make sure that you know how to get out there if you'd like to see the masterpiece of Alphonse Mucha. As far as meals go, of course, on Rixty's tours, half of your dinners are included. And you know, I think Eastern European food, it really has a reputation, not maybe the best, most varied food in the world, right? A lot of potatoes and cabbage and pork, which is all pretty much true. But it is more varied than you might think. There's a lot more variety than you'd expect in Eastern European food. And especially from country to country, your tour guide will make sure you know what the choices are. A lot of fun, characteristic restaurants. A lot of different ways to taste the different flavors of Eastern Europe. And as we get from country to country, I'll tell you a little bit more about some of the things you'll have in each place. Of course, down in Croatia and Slovenia, much more Mediterranean cuisine and climate. That's where you're going to find seafood like octopus salad. A lot of different flavors. Again, there might be more variety than you'd expect here in Eastern Europe. We always try to find local restaurants run by friendly local people who can really give you some insight. Of course, another important aspect of the cuisine of any country is the drink. And here in the Czech Republic, beer is an incredibly important part. A lot of people believe, beer connoisseurs, think that Czech beer is the best and certainly the cheapest anywhere in the world. And it's really a fantastic opportunity to learn a little bit about this important segment of Czech culture. We're going to head now into the next country, Poland, coming in from Prague and heading to the cultural capital, the historic capital, and the finest city of Poland, Krakow. This was the capital of Poland until about 500 years ago, and even though officially the capital was shifted to Warsaw, this is still where people really, the Polish soul really resides. This is where people really think very highly of it, think of it as their finest city. Absolutely spectacular main market square. I said earlier that the Prague's Old Town Square is one of the finest public spaces in Europe, and this also makes that list. Just a really grand space, bustling day and night with pigeons, cotton candy vendors, horse clip-clop rides going around the square, talented local folk musicians, outdoor cafes. This is just an absolutely delightful place to spend time. Great sightseeing all around this square. St. Mary's Church, for example, right there has a gorgeous wood-carved altarpiece inside. The centerpiece of the square is the main market hall, and it actually is a market hall still. It's a 500-year-old market hall, but these days, instead of selling cloth on the ground floor, they're selling souvenirs. Great place to do some shopping. There's an interesting art gallery upstairs as well. Anytime, day or night, this main market square is just a delightful place to spend time. Krakow also has an enormous variety of churches. They like to say they have more churches per capita than any city outside of Rome, and I think that's probably about right. As you know, the Polish people are very devoutly Catholic, and it's really an important part of the culture here. Speaking of cuisine, Polish cuisine has some interesting flavors. You've got the red beet soup called borscht. You've got a lot of more kind of cold weather northern ingredients, potatoes, dill, berries, this sort of thing. And there's some really affordable options for your free time meals. There's a system called milk bars. This is a fun little artifact of the communist period. They're basically government subsidized cafeterias where you can get a really delicious meal of traditional Polish food for $5, let's say. And it's a great way to kind of get a taste of potato pancakes, for example, and other delicious Polish foods. In terms of drink, Poland does have its share of beer, but the big drink here, of course, is vodka. And the most famous band is Żubrówka. This is the sort of thing that you never know when your guide might surprise you with a little taste of some of the local spirits, just to give you a sense of the full culture. Here in Krakow, they also have an important royal castle, Wawel Castle. This was the historic castle of the Polish kings, and has a lot of beautiful staterooms to tour. Although the most interesting feature, I would say, of Wawel Castle is this gorgeous cathedral, Wawel Cathedral, sort of the Westminster Abbey of Poland. This is where all the most important Polish kings and generals and statesmen are buried. And really something that's worth poking around and seeing this place where the Polish people celebrate their Catholicism. Of course, Pope John Paul II was Polish. He was the Archbishop here of Krakow. His Polish name was Karol Wojtyła. And even here after his passing, he's still revered in this city as perhaps nowhere else. So you'll see pictures of him all over the place. This picture sits in the window that he used to stay in when he would visit Krakow. He would come home to visit Krakow during his tenure as Pope. And the window where he used to kind of look out and sort of speak casually with the people waiting below. Now there's a photograph there of him to remember him by. There's some great day trips, and the one that we'll do together as a tour is the Velička salt mine. This is a spectacular underground salt mine where the miners over the centuries got kind of bored and decided to start carving sculptures out of the salt. And so they started carving more and more and more sculptures, and even carved an entire underground chapel completely out of salt. So everything you see here, from the floor tiles to these relief carvings on the wall to the altar, everything carved out of salt. So that's one of the great day trips from Krakow that we'll do together. We'll also see a neighborhood of Krakow that's just a little bit outside the center, which was the center of the Jewish population of Krakow and one of the more important Jewish populations in all of Eastern Europe up until World War II. It's a neighborhood called Kazimierz, and like the one in Prague, there's several museums. There's synagogues where you can go in and see exhibits about this chapter of the Jewish experience, Jewish cemeteries, this sort of thing. And also in this area, there's a brand new museum, fascinating place, at the actual factory of Oskar Schindler from Schindler's List. This is the German industrialist who came to Poland as a property owner. He bought this factory, gradually came to realize he needed to save his his Jewish workers, did his creative best and managed to save quite a few lives. Today, the factory where that actually happened, and also the factory where they filmed the movie Schindler's List, has just opened as a brand new state-of-the-art museum about Poland's World War II experience. And we'll go there together as a tour so you can get a look at that. Of course, the most important site in the Jewish chapter of Poland, tragically, is Auschwitz-Birkenau, that notorious concentration camp about an hour and a half outside of Krakow that claimed the lives of well over 1 million people. And it's a very sober site. It's really a pilgrimage. And a lot of times as a tour guide, I know people are reluctant to go here, and there's people sometimes even voice their thoughts maybe they shouldn't go at all. But I'll tell you, everybody who goes here comes away from it saying that was so important and so meaningful to see and understand what went on here really not so long ago. There's 2 parts to the Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp. Auschwitz I, the main camp, is basically old military barracks that were converted into a work camp where they held prisoners who were sent away to work during the day. And each of these barracks has been turned into a museum exhibit. For example, you walk into a room with a huge pile of the suitcases that were taken from people arriving. People would mark their names on the suitcases, thinking they would claim them again later. In most cases, they never were able to reclaim those suitcases. Really poignant and really well-presented documentation of what went on here. And then if you go just a mile and a half away, there's the second part of the camp called Birkenau. This was a gigantic, sprawling facility that could hold up to 100,000 people at one time. Basically a giant factory for the mass production of death. 4 crematoria going 24 hours a day. And this is the notorious dividing platforms. Trains would come through the gatehouse there. And as people walked off the train, an inspector would look at them and send them either this direction, which meant they were to be registered and kept alive at least a little longer to work, or they would point this direction, which meant that they were to go directly to the gas chambers. Extremely powerful to stand on the places where these things happened and hear about it from a very dedicated local guide who really brings the story to life. Of course, the message of all such concentration camp memorials is to really understand what happened here, to understand that this really did go on, and to ensure that it will never happen again. Again, a very powerful moment for most people who go on this tour, just to really understand that. We're going to cross yet another border, head south into Hungary, starting off in the small town of Eger, then heading to the capital of Budapest. And Esther already talked about Eger far better than I ever could. Beautiful, small, regional capital, gorgeous main square, more than its share of beautiful Baroque architecture, just a fine place to go for a stroll and get some local culture. But then we head out into the countryside, just outside of Eger, where we can do a wine tasting. We can learn how to make goulash. This is what Hungarians call gulyás-leves, shepherd's soup. And like Esther was saying, people think goulash is a thick stew. But in Hungary, it's actually more like a thin paprika-flavored broth with big chunks of beef and pork, and some potatoes as well. So we'll learn how to make real, authentic Hungarian goulash. And then we'll head into the vineyards to see some some of where the wine is actually made. And then we head to that school that we showed you a picture of earlier, where you can sit down and talk with Hungarian school children. As you probably know, this is something we really pride ourselves on with Rick Steves tours, not just taking you to the big sites, sure we'll see those, but also having meaningful one-on-one cultural interactions. This is one of the days on the tour where we really specialize in that. Then we'll head into the grand Hungarian capital city of Budapest. So much to see here, so little time, but fortunately we have 3 nights, so we do get a pretty good dose of this wonderful city. It used to be 2 different cities. Hilly Buda on the west side of the Danube, flat urban Pest on the east side of the Danube. This is where sort of the history is, and this is where the modern life is. Buda, Pest, across the Danube, linked by several bridges. We'll do a tour of Castle Hill on the Buda side of the river, up in the hills. Get a look at the Royal Palace and other beautiful structures. This is the Matthias Church, one of the most important churches of Hungary. Next to that is the Fisherman's Bastion, celebrating Hungarian heritage. Great views overlooking the rest of Budapest, looking across to the flat Pest side of the river. Heading down to the river, we'll cross the famous chain bridge. By the way, I say we'll cross the chain bridge over the Danube. You'll go back and forth over the Danube all day, but the most rewarding way to see the Danube is by floodlit nighttime cruise along the Danube. And as Esther mentioned, Budapest is, after Paris, the second most illuminated city in the world. The monuments are all just gorgeously lit up after dark. And this is a real highlight for a lot of people of the tour, gliding peacefully up the Danube River, looking at all the gorgeous monuments lit up. One of those monuments is over on the Pest side, the Hungarian Parliament building. In your free time, if you'd like, you can go for a tour of this spectacular late 19th century building. See the gorgeous dome from the inside. There's also a wonderful main market hall here in the city of Budapest. And actually, kind of like the Pike Place Market, perhaps, there actually is a lot of real everyday produce vendors down on the ground floor. And then you've got some souvenir stalls on the upstairs as well. So it's a great combination of a local as well as sort of a tourist-friendly experience. You really will see local people out buying the very best produce and ingredients. Also a great place to buy paprika. This is this quintessential Hungarian spice. You can either get it sweet or hot. Seasons basically every food you're going to eat here in Hungary, including that gulyás soup, the gulyás leves soup. This is what I was referring to. It's not that thick stew you'd think. It's just a bright red paprika-flavored broth. Absolutely delicious. Budapest has done a remarkable job of fixing up the city recently. 20 years ago, it was a pretty dreary place. The communists had really let it fall into quite a sad state of decrepitude. But these days, it's really rejuvenated. It's beautiful. They're pedestrianizing more and more streets in the city center. Just a delightful place to spend time. Here's this Jewish history that we've talked about already in other places. The second largest synagogue anywhere in the world is right here in Budapest, the Great Synagogue. Again, if you'd like to during your free time, you can go for a tour, and you can understand how inside it looks more like a church, because it was built in the late 19th century by church architects from Vienna, commissioned by a local Jewish population that was eager to show how well integrated they were with their Christian neighbors. Really fascinating to learn the history behind all of these buildings. Out back is this very poignant monument to the Hungarian Jews who were killed in the Holocaust, shaped like a weeping willow tree with the name of individual victims listed on each of the leaves of this willow tree, called the Tree of Life. Other great monuments in Budapest, one of the finest opera houses anywhere in Europe. You can see a fantastic world-class opera here at bargain prices. A lot of tour members choose to do this on one of their free nights. You can even get standing room tickets for something like $3 or $4, or you can pay a little bit more to have a comfortable seat. World-class opera that's so good that the Viennese up the river are known for coming to Budapest just because it's cheaper to get really good quality opera here. Right near the Opera House is a really interesting site of this recent history. This is called the House of Terror, right on the main boulevard of Budapest. It was used by 2 different regimes as a headquarters. First, it was used by the Aerocross, which was sort of the Nazi puppet government of World War II era Hungary. And then immediately following that, it became the headquarters of the secret police of the communist regime of Hungary. So you've got the Nazis followed by the communists, both using the same building. Just a reminder of the layers of very powerful recent history that take place here in Eastern Europe. There's an excellent museum there where you can learn all about this, what they call their double occupation. Out at the edge of things is the beautiful city park and the Millennium Monument. This was built in the year 1896 to celebrate the arrival of the original Hungarians in the year 896, 1,000 years later. Original Hungarians, this is an interesting tidbit about Hungary. Hungarians are not Slavic people. the Poles and the Czechs and the Croatians and the Slovenes are all Slavs. They're part of the same kind of large language family and cultural family, same as the Russians and the Ukrainians and so forth. But the Hungarians actually are descended from Central Asian tribes, nomadic tribes, that wandered for hundreds of years from sort of near today's Mongolia, across the Ural Mountains and wound up right here in what's today Hungary in the year about 896. So in the year 1896, Budapest chose to throw a big celebration of this millennial anniversary. To this day, the Hungarian language is much more closely related to Asian languages than it is to European languages. It has nothing at all in common with any of its neighboring languages. Again, this is sort of the differences in culture that might be lost on a casual visitor, but with a great tour guide, we'll make sure that you understand these changes. Right behind that Millennium Monument is the beautiful city park. Great place to hang out and relax. This is where Budapesters go to play. Lick an ice cream cone, play a game of chess. Now these guys decided to go to the park today to play chess, but right next to them is a building where they're going to head tomorrow. That's the Széchenyi thermal baths. They'll put on their Speedos and bring their chessboard and have a match there in the 100-degree water. I would say on this tour, as a tour guide I've learned, the thing that people are most reluctant about is going to these thermal baths. They think, do I really want to go to a Hungarian thermal bath? They imagine, well, whatever you're imagining right now, they imagine the worst case scenario. And I take it as my mission as a tour guide to make people comfortable. And I say, you know what, I'm going to take you with me. I'm going to lead you by the hand. I'm going to make sure that you know how it works. It's a little confusing at first. It's sort of like Eastern Europe in general. At first, it's a little confusing. It's the long list of different tickets that you can buy. They give you a wristband, and then you're supposed to go find your locker, and then you have to get changed and so forth. But if you can get over that initial hump, it's one of the most rewarding travel experiences that I've had anywhere in Europe. I'd never go to Hungary without going to a thermal bath. Basically, it's very accessible. You can have your swimsuit on the whole time at certain baths. This is the Széchenyi baths. This is our favorite. This is the one I take tour members to, right in that city park. Great way to reward yourself at the end of a long day. It's basically like your hometown swimming pool, except the water is 100 degrees. You're surrounded by spectacular Baroque domes, and everyone around you is a pot-bellied, Speedo-clad Hungarian. I mean, talk about a great cultural experience. But seriously, I never let a trip to Hungary pass without stewing in these beautiful thermal baths. For extra credit, you can try to join a game of chess. And you can just feel those jets massage your stress away. It's really a wonderful experience. Just to give you a little indication, though, I said earlier, Budapest has fixed itself up quite a bit. At the end of communism, not just Budapest, but all of these cities were pretty drab and dreary. I took this picture probably 10 years ago. Gloomy, everything was kind of soot-stained, the copper dome was rusted. And then just a couple of years ago, I took a new picture that just shows how things have changed. Again, this is not your father's Eastern Europe. This is a place that's a lot more clean and tidy and advanced and technologically advanced and Western and modern and whatever you want to call it. Your Cold War blinders are a thing of the past. And people are always really surprised at what they find here. By the way, in addition to the two main itineraries, we're still on that first Eastern Europe itinerary, but there's another itinerary. If you're really interested in those two main cities I've talked about so far, Prague and Budapest, we do have a tour that in 1 week just combines those two cities. So if you really just have a week to spare and really want to dig into those two cities, this is a good itinerary. All right, so we've done kind of the big heavy lifting on the Eastern Europe tour. We've been to all these big cities. It's been fast-paced. We're starting to get a little bit tired. The good news is this last few days of the Eastern Europe tour, it's time for a little vacation. You've earned it. Now we're going to head down into Croatia and Slovenia. First into Croatia to see this spectacular natural wonderland called Plitvice Lakes National Park. As I mentioned earlier, it's like a Grand Canyon, except that it's filled with 16 terraced lakes at all different levels, connected by gorgeous waterfalls, and ingeniously linked by a brilliant series of boardwalks and bridges that let you walk so close to these waterfalls that you can literally feel the spray. I've done this hike 20 times, and I never get tired of it. Best of all, it's really conveniently set up. You don't have to go for an arduous hike lasting for hours. On the tours, we stay in the park lodge. We wake up in the morning. We're the first out on the trails to avoid the crowds. And in about 3 hours, we're able to see the very best of the landscape and waterfalls and scenery. Oh, and by the way, I don't know if I mentioned that the water is perfectly clear. This is one of those places, Plitvice. Before the trip, you won't even know how it's pronounced. After the trip, you won't be able to believe you'd never heard of it before. It's just really one of the finest natural wonders that I've seen anywhere in the world. We like it so much, it's on our Eastern Europe tour, and it's also on our Adriatic tour. So either of these itineraries, you'll get to go through Plitvice. As if we needed more relaxation after that beautiful, tranquil hike, we're going to head now to the Croatian coastline, to the Adriatic, for a couple of nights and a full vacation day on an island called Rob. It's a quick ferry crossing from the mainland, and this is your vacation from your vacation. This is where you get to lie on the beach, go for a hike, go for a swim, hire a boat captain to take you around, make some new friends. It's just a delightful place to have some fun in the Croatian sun and just decompress after all the busy sightseeing that we've been doing. It's a wonderful rhythm on this tour. Fits really well. This is a couple of couples that I had on one of my tours years ago, and that day that we had free and Rob, they hired a boat captain to take them on a trip around the island and went swimming off the bow of the ship and so forth. And finally, the grand finale of the Eastern Europe tour is Slovenia. We're going to basically focus on two things: the caves of Škocjan and the mountains of Bled. Slovenia surprises a lot of people. It's a little tiny country. It's just 2 million people, but it's just loaded with diversity, beautiful, spectacular mountain scenery, outstanding cave systems. When we first arrive in Slovenia, the first thing we do is we take you on a hike through the Škocjan caves, one of the finest cave networks anywhere in the world. I've had tour members who say, I've been to Carlsbad, I've been to fill in the blanks, and this is one of the finest caves I've ever seen. And then that night we head on up to Lake Bled, where we really relax up in the Slovenian mountainsides. This is a beautiful kind of alpine lake in the foothills of the Julian Alps there in Slovenia. If you're from Seattle, the lake's about the size of Green Lake. That means that you could walk around the lake in about an hour and a half. Perfect little island right in the middle, topped by a perfect little church. We'll take a ride out to that island on these traditional boats that they have only here on Lake Bled, called Pletna boats. The hardworking oarsmen will row us out to the island. You'll have to climb 98 steps to reach the top of this, and it's kind of a fun tradition in Slovenia that when a couple gets married, they're supposed to come to Lake Bled, and the groom is supposed to carry, or try to carry, his bride up all 98 steps, thereby proving himself fit for marriage. I'll leave it to you whether you want to walk up yourself or carry your spouse. That's your choice. But we'll hike up these stairs, we'll ring the bell in the church, we'll make a wish. It's always hard not to wish for another return to Lake Bled. Just a gorgeous place. You can also walk all the way around the lake, enjoy ever-changing views of the scenery. Hike up to the castle for a great view over everything. Again, I can't think of a more relaxing and enjoyable place to finish our Eastern Europe tour. So that's what we've just done. We finished our Eastern Europe tour, and as tour guides, for years we would do this tour, and we'd notice there at the end, our tour members were craving more. They said, you've just given us this little enticing taste of Croatia, Slovenia. We want to know more about Croatia and Slovenia. So that's why a bunch of us put our heads together and hatched this itinerary. Best of the Adriatic in 14 days, a 2-week tour specializing in Slovenia, Croatia, and a little taste of Bosnia. We're going to do a little bit of rerun, but not stuff you'll complain about reruns. It's the good reruns, right? Your favorite episode is back on again. I'll watch it for the 5th time. The only things repeated between here and Eastern Europe are Lake Bled and those waterfalls at Plitvice Lakes. We'll start off in Ljubljana, the capital city of Slovenia, head up to the mountains in Lake Bled and Kobarid. We'll have a couple of days in Istria, the northern part of Croatia, the waterfalls there in Plitvice. Then head down for the last week or so to the Dalmatian coast, the southern third of the Croatian coastline. It's the part of Croatia that everyone knows and loves. It's sort of the famous, beautiful Croatian coastline. The big city of Split, islands of Hvar and Korčula. A little detour into Bosnia, and finishing up in Dubrovnik. I don't have time right now to tell you the whole history of this region, but let me tell you, that's one of the strong points of this tour. This is all part of the former Yugoslavia, and you will learn things about how Yugoslavia was formed following World War I. You'll learn about Tito, the communist dictator who kind of held Yugoslavia together during the 1950s, 60s, 70s. You'll learn about Slobodan Milosevic and how his power grab caused destabilization within Yugoslavia. You'll learn about how Yugoslavia broke up. You'll learn about how war took place here in Yugoslavia, the former Yugoslavia. And you'll learn how 7 countries have emerged from the ashes of what was once one country. Again, I don't have time to get into the details now, but rest assured, that is a major feature of this tour. Your guide is going to make sure that you know all this stuff. And one of my favorite things as a tour guide at the end of the tour, I love it when people come up and say, you know, I'm a smart person, and my whole life, I couldn't figure out who were the Croats and who were the Serbs, and why are there Muslims in the middle of Europe, and why were they all killing each other? And they say, now I know, now I understand, thank you. This is a place where, again, you can really learn history that blurs the line with current events. We're going to start off in Slovenia in the city of Ljubljana, and now we're going to have a chance to hear from Barbara Jakopic, who lives in Ljubljana and who leads this tour. She'll tell us a little bit about her hometown.
Hello, my name is Barbara, and I am from Slovenia. I am from Ljubljana, from the most beautiful city in Europe. Of course, I have to say it because this is my hometown, but I have to tell you that in recent years, more and more visitors that come to Ljubljana actually agree with me. It's a small country, it's a small town. This is one of the main squares in Ljubljana, Prešeren Square, and just around the corner, really just around the corner, is one of my favorite places, and that's the market, the fruit and vegetable market of Ljubljana, that sells everything that is in season. So you can buy cherries in summer, you can buy sauerkraut in autumn. You can meet the president of Slovenia because he comes to the market to buy his own sauerkraut and sour turnip. And also there is a small part of the market where you can buy fresh mushrooms when they're in season, but that is something that we don't do. Because people in Slovenia, we like the outdoors, we like nature, we like hiking, we like forests. Slovenia is the greenest country after Finland and Sweden, so we have a lot of forests, so we want to pick our own mushrooms. But the people there in the marketplace, they never want to tell you where the mushrooms are coming from. But we all speak Slovenian language. It's a small country, but it's very diverse, like Cameron said. So we have 42 different dialects. So what I do, I come to the market, I talk to the people there with mushrooms, and then I hear the dialect, I know where they're coming from. And for sure, I have some friends there or some relatives. I get them on the phone. I say, mushrooms are growing and you are not telling me this. And then I go and I pick mushrooms by myself. That's how we do it. But anyway, there are lots of hidden small corners to explore in Ljubljana. It's a beautiful town. And also in Slovenia. And you are more than welcome to join us and explore. We can explore together. And later on, of course, like Esther said, me, Cameron, and Esther will be available for questions. And now Cameron will tell you more about the Adriatic tour. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Barbara. If you're lucky and Barbara's your guide, maybe she'll take you mushroom picking or at least tell you where to go and looking for those mushrooms. Actually, she probably won't because they very carefully guard that information, as she said. Anyway, as she said, a lot of people consider Ljubljana one of the most beautiful cities in Europe. I'm one of those people. I've been to a lot of places in Europe, and Ljubljana is absolutely one of my favorites. It's just, for a national capital, it's so small and charming and pleasant and accessible. People are out for a Sunday stroll any day of the week. This is the main square, the bustling main square of Ljubljana. Very mellow place. Wonderful riverside promenade where you can sip a cup of coffee. I mentioned architecture in a few other cities. Again, even if you don't think you like architecture, Ljubljana has some fantastic late 19th century, early 20th century Art Nouveau kind of style architecture. Really bold, beautiful facades. This is one by a Slovenian architect who was trying to create a uniquely Slovenian national style. And maybe it's a good thing that one didn't catch on, but it was worth a try. The architect that you'll learn a lot about in Slovenia, his name is Jože Plečnik. He worked in the early 20th century, lived in Ljubljana, and really, because he had to walk to work every day, redesigned the whole city in basically a way that would make him comfortable to live there. So he, for example, designed all of these beautiful riverfront embankments along the river there. His masterwork is the National University Library. It's just loaded with symbolism. All of the symbolism has to do with overcoming barriers to enlightenment. So, for example, here's Moses, who led his people through 40 years of hardship to the promised land. Again, it's a library, so it's all about coming into enlightenment. You walk in the front door and you grab the doorknob, and it's the head of Pegasus, who whisks you away to new levels of enlightenment. To get to that main reading room at the top, the last gauntlet, you have to go up a stairway that's designed to resemble an Egyptian tomb. One last challenge. And then you go into the main reading room, and it's just light and filled with air and books and knowledge and enlightenment. Again, very beautifully designed. A lot of people compare Ljubljana to Salzburg. It's kind of an apt comparison. It's got a castle on a hill with a river around the base in the foothills of the Alps. All you have to do is replace Mozart with the local poet, Franz Prešeren, and you've got it. After Ljubljana, we're going to take another quick visit to Lake Bled, which you've already seen. Then we're going to head high into the Slovenian mountains. We're going to see some traditional Slovenian hay racks. Believe it or not, this is a very proud national symbol of the Slovenes. Little roofs on the top to keep the hay dry in rain. We're going to drive up the 50 switchbacks of the Vršič Pass over the Julian Alps. And our bus drivers are mostly from Slovenia. They've driven this hundreds of times. 26 switchbacks on the way up, 24 switchbacks on the way down, a total of 50 switchbacks up and down. And all the way you're just surrounded by spectacular mountain scenery, interesting little offbeat sites, little chapels, viewpoints. And of course, you end up down in the Socha River Valley, which is where we're going to spend the night on the way down to Croatia. In addition to its beautiful river here, the Socha River Valley has these fun, springy suspension bridges. And also some really interesting 20th century history. One of the most fiercely fought battles of World War I, called the Socha Front, better known by its Italian name, the Isonzo Front, was actually fought in the mountaintops around the Socha Valley. You'll see, for example, a giant Italian mausoleum for the soldiers who died in that fighting. Then we head into Croatia, starting in Istria, the northwest corner of Croatia. The beautiful seaside town of Rovinj. Rick and I agree this is the finest seaside town between Venice and Dubrovnik. Just a fantastic place. Looks like it's being pulled up to heaven by its grand Venetian bell tower. Great place to just go on a photo safari. You find a fisherman mending his nets, local artists, people flying dried laundry like they're flying their flag. You never know who's watching you while you're walking through the streets. Just a great place to spend a few hours here on our tour and get a taste of the Croatian coastline. You can go for a bike ride to get better views. We'll also see Pula's Grand Amphitheater. Pula was a very important Roman city, and now it's got one of the most finely preserved, most historic Roman amphitheaters you'll find anywhere in Europe. And the old town is also dotted with other Roman artifacts. But what's interesting for me about Istria is the countryside, the interior, not the coastline. Most of Croatia is about the coastline. But here in Istria, we're going to show you some of the beautiful hill towns, vineyards, and we're going to actually stay in one of those hill towns on this tour, Motovun. This is a beautiful hill town overlooking oak groves and vineyards. Gets the Rick Steves seal of approval. And it's a great place to spend our night and home base for our time here in Istria. Great views over the territory. Great place for a wine tasting to get to sample what's being produced at all those wineries. Istria is also well known for its truffles, so you'll get a chance on your free time to have dinner at a restaurant that maybe specializes in truffle dishes. In general, the food in Croatia is quite different than what we saw in Eastern Europe. You're going to have a lot of pizza, a lot of pasta, a lot of seafood. So whether you're with us together or whether you're on your own for a meal, you'll be able to try all of those. And of course, they seem to specialize in ice cream there as well. After Istria, we're going to visit Plitvice Lakes National Park, that gorgeous waterfall wonderland that we talked about already. And right nearby, we will see some remains from the recent war, and I already alluded a little bit to this complicated history. I will say, first of all, this is a very safe place to travel. The war, I say, is recent, but at this point, it was almost 20 years ago. And you will see in a few parts of the country some signs of this war and memorials, but for the most part, it's rebounded. But it is a fascinating and a very poignant opportunity to learn about what you saw in the headlines not too long ago. Then we're going to head to the coastline. Again, the last week or so is along the Dalmatian coast. The big city of Split, which has a wonderful waterfront promenade, a great place to sit out and sip a coffee. By day or by night, it's the place to be. It's where the local people of Split go for their evening promenade or passeggiata. And then the old town of Split, which is actually the former retirement palace of a Roman emperor. Now, I didn't say that the Roman palace is in the old town of Split. I said that the old town is the palace, literally. The old palace of the Roman Emperor Diocletian, over time, began to decay and fall apart after the fall of Rome. Locals moved in. They turned the hallways of the palace into the streets of the old town. They turned the walls and rooms of the palace into the houses of the old town. So when you walk through the old town of Split, you're literally walking through the hallways of an old Roman palace. There's that Roman Emperor Diocletian. This is his mausoleum. And of course, Diocletian was notorious for persecuting Christians, but in this great bit of poetic justice, now his mausoleum has been turned into a cathedral with a Venetian-style bell tower. Just a sense of the layers of history that you find here in Croatia. Underneath the entire old town is these cellars, basically like a modern daylight basement used to level out the ground, and you can go and tour this fascinating Roman construction used to create a firm platform for the palace. Great chance to learn about local sculptors. Ivan Meštrović, for example, is a very famous Croatian sculptor. And he has a museum right here in Split. So if you're interested in this very Croatian, very unique sculptor, it's a good chance to learn a little bit about him. Then we're going to set sail on this tour and do some island hopping. We're going to visit 2 different islands here in Croatia using public boats. It's a great way to kind of set sail and enjoy the scenery. First, we're going to go to the island of Hvar for a few hours. This is kind of, Croatia has more than 100 islands, and each one has its own personality. Hvar is a very kind of ritzy upscale island. It's trying to cultivate this Croatian Riviera vibe. You get a lot of luxury yachts putting in here. And we'll be there for a few hours, just enough time to take a look at the cathedral, maybe hike up to the fortress overlooking town, which offers sweeping views over the town. Then we're going to continue on to Korčula, another island, which is a little bit more homey, a little bit less pretentious. Great place to spend a couple of nights. And then we'll have a full day here. This is the kind of island that makes you want to jump for joy. Korčula is just a really, really delightful place. They also have their cathedral and little museums, but really this is about fun in the sun, going for a swim in this crystal clear water with this beautiful Croatian island backdrop. You can rent a sea kayak, you can hire a captain to take you out on a boat, and so forth. Leaving Korčula, we're going to do a big cultural detour. This is where we're going to get a taste of Bosnia, which was part of Turkey, part of the Ottoman Empire for many centuries. So most people here, for example, the majority are Muslims. You'll see a lot of mosques, a lot of minarets. And we're going to spend a night and a very busy day seeing the great city of Mostar, with its famous old bridge built by the Ottoman Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent. And during the recent war in the 1990s, this bridge was actually pummeled by artillery shells from the hilltop high above until it finally fell into bits and literally fell into the river, destroyed. And then only about 6 or 7 years ago did they rebuild the bridge using original methods, original materials. It's a very poignant symbol for the reconciliation and the recovery that went on here after the war that wasn't too long ago. And before, when the bridge was the true old bridge, and now when it's the rebuilt one, a favorite tradition is for young men to stand at the top of the bridge, and they kind of put on a show trying to get tips, and once they get enough money, they'll take the icy plunge and jump all the way down into the river below. That's always a fun thing to see here in Mostar. The riverbank here is basically a Turkish-style bazaar. Again, you're only a couple hours from the Croatian coast, but you feel like you could be in Turkey. It just is a great symbol of how this is a crossroads of cultures. You can go into a mosque, learn a little bit about Islam from a local Muslim, go to an old Turkish house and see how Turkish people lived here 100 years ago. There's also a large Catholic population, and there's some friction still between the two groups, but you'll see the grand Catholic cathedral that is clearly designed to mimic those minarets of the Muslim mosques across town. And you will still see in this town, more than anywhere else, a lot of war damage. And so this is another fascinating opportunity to learn about this difficult chapter of the recent history. The thing about Mostar is it's becoming more and more popular. It's very accessible. It's easy to get to from the Dalmatian coast. Most people coming here are day trippers, so it can get quite crowded during the day. But we spend the night because we want you to have that wonderful after dark experience in this grand city of Mostar. You can hear the call to prayer warbling over the rooftops at twilight. The grand finale of this tour, our last stop, if I had to pick one place to go in Croatia, it would be this, Dubrovnik. They call it the Pearl of the Adriatic for the way that it juts out proudly behind its thick walls. It's a sea of red rooftops. Dubrovnik's motto is Libertas, liberty. They were actually an independent republic, kind of like Venice for most of their history, right up until Napoleon, and they're very proud of that connection. Although now they're happy to be part of the united Croatia. The main drag is a great place to go for a stroll. Not a lot of heavy-duty sightseeing here, but there are some fine little churches and museums worth poking into. A couple of convents that have really beautiful cloisters that have been turned into museums. You can go to the old port and hop an excursion boat out to the offshore islands. You can walk up into the steep, tight little lanes that go up from the main drag toward the mainland. And they've just repaired a cable car that was destroyed during the war 20 years ago. You can ride a cable car all the way up to this viewing platform overlooking this spectacular old town of Dubrovnik. It's a great place to watch the sunset here. This is also a great place to have some beach time. The city center gets really crowded during the day, mostly with cruise passengers, but again, we're spending 2 nights here. So during the day, you might want to get out of town, go find a beach near or far from the old town. You can even go for a swim right off of the old town walls. My favorite activity here, and something we'll do together on the tour, walking around the entire wall, takes about an hour. Spectacular views all the way of Dubrovnik's old town. You've got a sea of rooftops on one side. You've got the actual sea on the other. Fantastic towers. And then occasionally, your tour guide will pause to make sure you really understand what you're seeing, right? This is what a tour guide is there for. Notice how most of the roofs are this bright red color, new and shiny. And you've got a few older, decrepit roofs. And your tour guide will say, Dubrovnik was one of the only coastal towns, one of the only tourist towns that was damaged and destroyed during the recent war. In fact, the city was bombarded by artillery from the hilltops above for a siege lasting several months. Something like 80% of the rooftops of Dubrovnik were destroyed. The city was in flames. Now it's been fixed up. And you'll only know what's old and what's new if you look closely. New rooftops on this side, old rooftops on this side. And for our grand finale, we're going to head to my favorite bar in Dubrovnik. This is called Buja. Buja means hole in the wall, and you literally have to climb through a hole in the wall to get to this bar that's clinging like a barnacle to the outside of the city wall. A great place to sip a drink, watch the cruise ship sail off into the sunset, and think about this wonderful experience we've had here on the Adriatic. Folks, thank you so much for your attention. Barbara and Esther and I are going to the Floral Center if you have more questions. Otherwise, we'll see you later. Thanks for coming.